Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
Vessel whale collisions are a significant concern in Glacier Bay National Park and Preserve, where nutrient-rich waters support a seasonal influx of humpback whales and other marine mammals. As one of the most visited marine parks in Alaska, Glacier Bay sees a high volume of vessel traffic, including cruise ships, tour boats, and private watercraft. This is Kurt Repenchek, your host at the National Parks Traveler. This summer, an adult humpback whale was seen with a fresh, 1-foot gouge behind its dorsal fin, which appeared to be from contact with a boat propeller. This week, the Traveler's Lynn Riddick reaches out to biologist Chris Gabriele to discuss this incident and the park's strategies to reduce whale collisions, including monitoring whale activity, warning systems, and public education. Lynn will be back in a minute with Chris to discuss this problem.
Washington's National Park Fund is the official philanthropic partner serving Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks. WNPF raises funds for scientific research, youth experiences, volunteer programs, and projects that preserve and protect these national parks in Washington state. Learn how you can help at WNPF.org. The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org. Smokey's Life. Full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smokey's Life Journal is a biannual magazine produced by Smokey's Life, formerly the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokieslife.org. Acadia National Park is one of the 10 most popular national parks in the United States. It's also one of the smallest and most vulnerable. That's why Friends of Acadia exists. Friends of Acadia is an independent organization of passionate people inspiring those who love this magnificent park to make a real and lasting difference for Acadia. You can make a difference at friendsofacadia.org. Support from readers and listeners like you make the National Parks Traveler possible every day of the year. If you enjoy the Traveler's content, please consider a donation at nationalparkstraveler.org.
My guest today is biologist Chris Gabriele, who directs the humpback whale monitoring program at Glacier Bay National Park and Preserve. She's calling in from her office in Gustavus, Alaska. Hi, Chris. Welcome to The Traveler.
Hi, thanks. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, this is a really fascinating topic, and I wanted to start by, talking a little bit about Glacier Bay. The National Park and Preserve is part of one of the largest internationally protected biosphere reserves in the world. It is also a World Heritage Site. Chris, would you please start off by describing this unique place?
Well, Glacier Bay is a glacial fjord system. So there's tidewater glaciers at the heads of the fjords. And as you mentioned, it's one of the largest marine wildernesses in the world. It's, I guess what we say about Glacier Bay is that the only constant is change. In the time of Vancouver, there were glaciers all the way down to the mouth of Glacier Bay. And over the course of time, those glaciers have receded from the Little Ice Age. And so that is revealing new marine habitats all the time and also terrestrial habitats. So it's just a really fascinating place for biology because you can kind of watch that stuff in action. We have a lot of different marine wildlife as well as terrestrial wildlife, spectacular peaks and scenery. Really, I've worked here 35 summers so far, and it just gets more and more spectacular.
What is the significance of Glacier Bay National Park as a habitat for whales? And are there other whales beside humpback?
Yes, there are other whale species besides humpback whales, although they are kind of the main, most abundant whale in the bay. We have two different ecotypes of killer whales that we see in the summer and in other seasons as well. We have a small number of minke whales, and then we also have smaller porpoises. And yeah, so there's a lot of different marine mammals. There's harbor seals and sea lions, etc. It's a real hot spot. So, Glacier Bay is a really biologically productive place. So that means that it's a really rich underwater ecosystem, and that's what drives all the systems that feed the whales. So, yeah, it's a very biologically productive place, and that just, starts this whole cascade of marine productivity that produces both krill and small schooling fish, and that's what the whales are there to eat. There are a variety of different species of small fish, and honestly, a biologist friend of mine here at the park says, the whales are actually the least exciting part of the ecosystem because all the unknown, all those mysterious processes and species that folks are really unfamiliar with are actually happening under the surface. So Glacier Bay is just a really fascinating marine ecosystem.
Now, any idea of how many humpbacks there can be in the Bay Area at any given time?
Yeah, well, I would say we had a peak just a couple weeks ago that we probably had 75 or so humpback whales in Glacier Bay and Icy Strait, so in the park and then just outside the park. The whales kind of come and go, so on our monitoring program, we actually study them in both areas. And over the course of the entire last year, we had 184 different whales visit the area.
That's incredible.
Mm.
How far up bay do the whales travel, particularly the humpback whales?
These days, as I've said, the glaciers kind of receded and opened up new habitat as they went away and after the Little Ice Age, and so the whales tend to be in the lower bay, partly because of oceanographic features like upwelling, but they also these days are right up into the fjords where the glaciers are. And it's what's one interesting thing about humpbacks is that they're actually really creatures of habit. They decide what their preferences are in terms of what their food sources and where they like to be. And so there are some whales that are just way up near the glaciers, on a daily basis, where there are other whales that would just really stay in other parts of the bay.
Do they need a certain depth of water?
I would say no. This year we've seen a lot of whales feeding in very shallow water, like too shallow for our research boat to go and follow them. They kind of sometimes chase the fish that they're trying to eat right up against the shore as another barrier so they can get more to eat. But no, they don't have a minimum depth. But they tend to be in 60 meters of water, 60, but there are some very deep parts of Glacier Bay where there are krill that the whales eat, so they also use that habitat.
Now, you mentioned the whale monitoring program and other whale protections put in place by the park, and I want to talk about that. But first, the whale that was injured in June.
Yeah.
It's identified as number 2583,
Mhm.
an adult whale that the park reports has been sighted in Glacier Bay and Icy Strait since 2013. So
Right.
we're a little over a month now post injury. Are there additional details you've learned about this incident? Has it been cited since? Do you know if the whale is okay?
hmm Yeah, that was a really startling and tragic thing to find, that whale with a gash in its back. And the good news is, we consulted veterinarians immediately, like, is this whale going to survive? But they said that if it hadn't, bled to death already, or and it was able to move normally, then the chances, were pretty good. Other colleagues from other places, including California, have, instances of whales with surviving such injuries. So the whale had been sighted 3 weeks after the injury. We haven't seen it recently. It was part of this group of whales that was just, like I said, there were so many whales around, and then that group kind of moved on. So we haven't seen any of them. So yeah, so we had sightings up through July 16th, and so that's a good couple weeks of survival. And you could see that the injury had changed over that time. So we really do believe more and more that it had just happened when the whale was first sighted with the injury. So we have high hopes for that whale. It probably will be, a handicap, I guess, for that whale to have that injury. Like, for example, if it encountered any entangling ropes or something, something could get caught in there.
Can you describe the injury?
What the injury looks like is a slice of pie kind of out of the back of the whale. But, on the scale of a whale, that slice was about a foot deep. And what you can see on the inside, if you've seen the photos of it, is it looks whitish, and that's the blubber of the whale, and then the black skin is on the edge. And fortunately, it didn't affect any of blood vessels. It doesn't seem to have affected its ability to move. So, yeah, and it seems like subsequent photos show that the wound is healing. So, I think the prognosis is fairly good, but it's not a good thing.
Now, what about the vessel whale collision that happened about a week before that incident? What happened with that? What do you know now?
So there was a whale that I saw in Icy Strait that had. Is that the one you're talking about in the media release?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Because subsequently, like last week, there was a calf that actually was found dead near Juneau. So there was another ship strike since we talked. And yeah, so there is a whale that I saw the prior week that has kind of a smaller version of that, more of a superficial wound, also from a propeller. And the thing is that whales are really good at they have really good hearing, and they're really quick, and they're very aware of their surroundings, but sometimes things get confusing, or maybe if a vessel is traveling too fast, the whale can't quite get out of the way in time. And so I think that's kind of why these things happen. And one of the best things that boaters can do, and what we who try to manage the issue can do, is have vessels avoid the area where there are known to be a lot of whales, and get advanced information to know what areas are going to be most problematic, and also go at as slow a speed as you can go. Really, that is what allows the whale to get out of the way.
Yeah, we'll talk about those things a little bit more in detail, but I have a question about, you mentioned the three whale vessel collisions that occurred just in the last couple of months. What data do you have on the frequency of vessel whale collisions in Glacier Bay?
So two of those were not in Glacier Bay. Only one of them was the one. And let's see. So in Glacier Bay, we only have one prior known whale fatality from a collision, and that occurred in 2001. And perhaps that low rate is in part because we have all these protections in place that we'll talk about in a little bit. For this interview, I contacted NOAA, and they are in the process of writing a report summarizing marine mammal vessel collisions. And what my colleague told me was that there's an average of about 7 to 9 per year in Southeast Alaska, collisions in Southeast Alaska. And humpback whales are the most commonly struck species of whale, partly because there's strong overlap. The whales are coastal, humans are coastal, we have a lot of boats in the water, and so there's a lot of overlap. So those statistics are based on either like a whale found dead on the beach, or from a vessel operator who says, "Oh no, I hit a whale." And often they don't know the outcome, like, is the whale okay or not okay? And also, when the whale is on the beach, it's very difficult for the veterinarians to figure out the cause of death. So there's probably more collisions occurring, and ones that are just superficial, than actually those numbers.
Are certain whale age groups more vulnerable to collisions?
Yeah, unfortunately, calves and juveniles are the most vulnerable ones. And, on the upside, in our population monitoring last year, we had a record number of calves. We had 24 humpback whale calves last year. So that was super, super great. But that means there's 24 juveniles and toddlers running around now who don't really necessarily have the experience to to be able to avoid vessels, as well as, like, they're learning everything in the first couple years of their life. So that could be a factor in the number of collisions that happen.
Are whale populations increasing? Sounds like there's quite a few there. I don't have any reference points though.
Whale populations, kind of as a whole, were decimated by commercial whaling in the 20th century. And so in 1966, humpback whales stopped being commercially hunted. And populations took a long time to recover, but as of the start of the population monitoring that we are doing, in 1985 is when we started, it was increasing at about 5% per year. And that was really great. And but what happened in 2014 is we actually had a marine heat wave in the North Pacific, a very widespread and prolonged marine heat wave, abnormally warm water. And that lasted through 2016. So that really decimated the humpback whale population in the Pacific. Locally, we saw a 56% decline in 4 years. And then a lot of those whales are presumed dead at this point. However, really the prolonged so over time, some of those whales came back from wherever they had been, probably looking for food because there was the food supply in a very broad area was really reduced. And so our numbers as of are like 30% lower than they had been. So we essentially lost 30% of our whales in the mid 20 teens, and the whales are still trying to recover from that.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the various management strategies for avoiding collisions with whales. Part of that is the whale monitoring system, which you had mentioned and alluded to.
The need to protect the whales in Glacier Bay National Park is why the population monitoring system, our program is in place. Because what we do is we go out in a small boat and we systematically survey, much of the park on a weekly basis, and then we determine where there are whale hotspots. And those areas we recommend to the superintendent that some extra preventative measures are needed. So, yeah, mostly that would be a reduced speed limit or prohibiting vessels from being near shore. And we also, in the park, vessels are not allowed to approach within a quarter mile of a whale. So that really works for vessels that are going slow, small vessels that are maneuverable, and they can see that whale and then change course or do something. But the larger vessels, we've had to take a very different approach with them because they're less maneuverable. They're professional mariners, but they're less maneuverable. So they really need kind of more notice about where they might encounter whales.
Yeah, so how do you monitor whale presence and relay that information in real time to other vessels?
So it's something that relaying it to mariners in real time is something that we only started doing in about 2016. And that's when we started using this app called Whale Alert. It's something that's available for any mobile device that people have. And what we actually did was take that another level and develop Whale Alert Alaska, which is basically a sighting network that is contributed to by cruise ships and large vessels in Southeast Alaska, as well as us researchers. We put our data on there so that at any time they can go, if they've signed up for a login, they can go onto that map and they can look where the whales have been sighted. So each ship is kind of contributing to that so that the next ship that comes along has more advance notice. Because once we started talking with mariners about why collisions occur, and they said, geez, if we knew in advance that where the whales would be, that would really help a lot. And so in that case, they can take measures like posting an extra lookout. They can reduce speed proactively. They can do all sorts of things. I should mention also that cruise ships are required to actually check that map before entering Glacier Bay. And that way they have a heads up and they can plan their voyage accordingly. And so I think that is really an important thing, that kind of advance awareness of where whales are. But the other thing is, it's really allowed us to develop a little bit of a rapport with the marine pilots and the bridge teams on the ships and really keep whales as part of the conversation. And so whether a vessel decides to slow down because they saw a whale hotspot on the map from a couple days ago, that's kind of a professional decision. But it makes it so that they're actually thinking about collision avoidance a lot more of the time. And I think that's part of the power of the program.
And is there mandatory reporting of whale sightings?
There's not mandatory reporting, but honestly, we get really great response. We had, thousands of sightings last year. So from our 2024 Whale Alert Alaska end of year report, last year we had 42 active members in Whale Alert Alaska, including 29 cruise ships and 13 marine pilots. And together, those groups contributed almost 3,000 whale sightings to the sighting network.
That's amazing. And I thought I read something about a mandatory viewing of a video for boater education and awareness about whales.
Yeah. Yeah. So for our recreational boating visitors, as well as our commercial operators on vessels large and small, yeah, there is a required orientation. And yeah, in terms of the small vessel, coming into Glacier Bay, yeah, you're required to stop at Bartlett Cove and talk with the ranger and watch an orientation video that tells you about everything from calving icebergs to whale avoidance.
Now, talk a little bit about how vessel motor noise impacts the whale's movement and its underwater sound environment, because you might think that if a whale hears any noise, it'll skedaddle, but that's not necessarily the case, right?
Right. Yeah, vessel noise affects whales a lot, but in a lot of different ways. Some whales, as you mentioned, might hear a noise coming and like go in the other direction. A lot of them would do that. They are highly motivated by food, however, so sometimes the whale just stays where it is because it really needs to feed. So we talk about like disturbance of a whale by noise, but what we've really kind of focused in on in terms of a biologically relevant effect on noise is it kind of shrinks the area over which a whale can communicate. So imagine you and I are trying to have this conversation, and then someone starts vacuuming my office, or a truck goes by outside your window. We are not going to be able to communicate the same way that we were. I would get louder. I might have to repeat myself. We're probably going to decide not to have that conversation until that noise stops. And those same kinds of things happen to whales. But the thing about whales is that they're really relying on that underwater sound environment and their hearing, because that beautiful, rich underwater ecosystem in Glacier Bay means that they really don't have much visibility. Like they probably couldn't see the end of their own flipper if they were trying to look over there. So they're really sensing the environment with their ears. And so underwater noise and a good clean underwater sound environment is really important for whales.
Do you have any research that measures different vessel motor noises?
Yes, we do. We're actually in. We've done a number of different research projects on that in terms of like what the effects are. So yes, we've measured individual vessels, the sound output, and what we do is put them sometimes into computer models to be able to predict, for example, like what would happen if you had more vessels, or what would happen if those vessels were going slower. Those kinds of things are what allow park managers to try to keep the whale resources and the rest of the park in good shape. Fortunately, in a place like Glacier Bay, where the vessel traffic is controlled, we don't allow an unlimited amount of vessels in the bay, both to keep the resources healthy and also to keep the visitor experience really high. People want to, experience that wilderness. But fortunately, in a place like Glacier Bay, it's pretty quiet at night. That it's not like a continuous vessel traffic. Worldwide, there are places where these whales are really trying to live in a very urbanized environment where the noise really never stops.
Well, have you ever witnessed or been involved in a vessel whale collision yourself?
No. Have I witnessed one? No, I was very near one. And that's the thing. I was very I was very near one once. Um, the effects of whale vessel collisions are different depending on the size of the vessel. And one of the things we learned when we studied this was that, for small vessels, there's really a risk for human injury and damage to the vessel. And once I was out on a whale survey, and nearby there had been a small skiff going much too fast in an area where there were known to be a lot of whales, and actually one of the people was ejected from the boat and ended up in the water. And in Alaska, ending up in the water is really life threatening because it's very cold. So the person was okay, but we do often hear in the news about people who their small boat hits a whale, and they end up with broken bones and that kind of thing. So there really is a human injury cost to it as well. We're focusing on whale vessel collisions, but they really avoid getting hit most of the time. So that's a really good thing. And I guess to the extent that people can kind of predict what the whale is going to do next, and that's very difficult, even for someone who's been studying them for a long time. I know that they are creatures of habit, and so if they're in an area, they're probably going to come back to that area. So that's why we use that system where if we know there's a hot spot, it'll persist for a while. So, be extra careful in that area. They do come up kind of regularly. So if they're on like 4-minute dive times, wait 4 minutes and that whale is probably going to be up in the same place. But, when a vessel's in transit, it's really hard for them to use that information.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting in your documentation here, behavioral cues you can use, blow patterns.
Yeah, so when a whale comes up from a dive, you often see a really strong blow right at the beginning because they're kind of thirsty for some air, and that the blow is their respiration, and it's basically little droplets of water that were sitting on top of the blowholes that kind of get spewed up into the air like 10 feet high. So they're pretty, they're like plumes. And so the first blow when a whale comes up can be pretty strong, and then they'll, blow every, 4 to 6 seconds or so. Every whale is different, and then kind of when they're having their last breath before they dive, they also tend to make a stronger blow, and then their head comes up, and then they go down. So once the whale's up, you can kind of predict and see that stuff. But the thing that makes it hard is that sometimes a whale will look like it's traveling, left to right, across where the person is looking, and then it'll come back over here, up the next time, and it won't have gone right. It'll have, done something different. So I think that's the nature of the fact that the whales they're chasing schools of fish around, and they'll go wherever the fish go.
And what about when a mother has her calf present? How is that a little harder to predict?
Yeah, that can be really much harder to predict, and mothers and calves really need special consideration because often the mom will go down and dive, and the calf will be left at the surface for a little while on its own, and so they're not as savvy about avoiding vessels. Plus, they're very experimental. They like to try things, so they're a little more risky. They engage in risky behaviors that perhaps they shouldn't. And so that is one. That's a real risk for mothers and calves. But a lot of the mothers really keep very close tabs on their calves.
Now, from what you mentioned, it sounds like professional mariners, cruise ship pilots are pretty good, pretty savvy, generally good at understanding what whale behaviors are and how to respond.
So, Glacier Bay National Park had a cruise ship observer program from 2006 to 2023, and hopefully it'll get going again. But we had some technical difficulties, and that was led by my fellow scientist, Scott Gandy. And so he had an observer on the bow of 3 or 4 cruise ships a week. And what their goal was to look at how close the whales ended up to the ship and how often was that happening. And then looking at all the whale behavior that occurred in the meantime to try to understand, why collisions might happen. So having an observer on the ship really started a conversation, kind of face-to-face conversation between marine pilots and scientists, as well as the cruise ship industry folks. And one of the things that was a great result of that was a scientific paper led by my colleague Scott Gendy with some marine pilots working with us. And that kind of breaks down what it takes for a cruise ship to try and avoid a whale. So one thing is that you see a whale in the distance, and it takes a little bit of time to figure out. First, you have to see the whale. Then, what way is it going, and what should I do in that case? And if I wanted to do something about that, then it would take a minute to like give the command to the helmsman to do something, and then it takes a while for the helmsman to be able to execute whatever that command is. And so it was really fascinating and very productive for us to have this conversation together about really what active whale avoidance really takes. And the scientific paper that we wrote has had over 8,500 views on the. It's an open access publication, and so it's been really read by a lot of different people. And one of the things that we concluded at the end of that paper was that we really needed to have training that was designated for whale avoidance for bridge teams and marine pilots. And I'm very happy to say that we're actually finally just starting that project. We're having our first meeting in a couple of weeks and working with some of those same marine pilots and going to a full mission bridge simulator. And what that is, like a lot of people are familiar with the idea that like an airline pilot would go to a flight simulator and have that environment of what it's like to be flying a plane. Well, there's the same thing for large vessels, probably large and small vessels. And these mariners use these to learn new skills and to, as continuing education. So for the first time that we know of, we are going to be creating training with a whole day long training that will simulate whales being near ships. And then the students in those classes can actually try different maneuvers that will help them learn offline, not in real life, how to avoid whales. So we're super excited about that. And yeah, it's still a year out from when we would have that available, but we're really excited to have that resource available.
And so would this training be part of the simulation that large ships already have?
Yeah, so these are very sophisticated simulators. They mimic exactly what this particular ship how it would act in a different current. And if they can simulate like it's foggy or it's windy or all these different things. They're very sophisticated. But the thing was, before we really brought this up, nobody was using that. There really weren't graphics for a whale, and there was no training that really talked about whale avoidance. So really super excited to work with these pilots who have so much experience and knowledge about whales and navigation. And, it's just really a great synergy, a great collaboration.
So, some of these protective measures, if they are violated, speed restrictions or shipping lane violations, are there enforcement measures or citations issued? Maybe I'm thinking more of recreational boaters.
The thing about our commercial boaters is it's very competitive to get a commercial permit to operate in Glacier Bay. And so we through that competitive process, we get some of the finest operators available that are our operators. Plus, they are on their best behavior because they want to keep those privileges to bring people into the park. So we don't really have a lot of violations of speed and course restrictions. Sometimes there are glitches, people aren't aware of a new temporary, whale hotspot or things like that. But we really have very high compliance with the regulations. In terms of the private boaters, there is, as we mentioned, that boater orientation when you go into Glacier Bay. And sometimes people are so excited about their visit and they're kind of overwhelmed with all the information that they're getting and whatever, and they might not quite understand exactly what they need to do. So people do get, warnings and things. But again, we have a pretty high rate of compliance. You don't really find people approaching too close to whales in motorboats. So we have pretty good compliance. Yeah.
Good.
But there would be fines and penalties for doing the wrong thing.
We've talked a lot about whales, humpbacks especially, but what about vessel impacts with other marine life like the endangered stellar sea lions or harbor seals? Does that happen frequently?
Seals and sea lions are a little bit different because they have that part of their biology that takes place on land. So, stellar sea lions are one of the great visitor attractions in Glacier Bay because they haul out on this set of islands, and vessels can go by there and get a good look at them pretty much without disturbing them. If vessels do get too close, the big risk for the stellar sea lions as well as for harbor seals who haul out on ice and little sand spits where they feel safe from predators. If those animals are caused to go in the water, they kind of, that's really not a good thing. And in the case of harbor seals, which have their pups in Glacier Bay, when vessel impacts occur, so if a vessel gets too close, and then if there's a mom and a pup, and either the mom or the pup gets separated because they go in the water, that's kind of the biggest biological impact. So those kinds of things can happen. Harbor seals, increasingly, I'm learning, really use the underwater sound environment, especially during their breeding season in the summer. And so those same effects that I was talking about with whales, where the distance over which they can communicate really shrinks in the presence of vessel traffic, that affects harbor seals and other marine mammals as well.
So, what kind of additional research or data collection would help improve, whale or general sea mammal protections?
So it's not an easy thing being a whale in today's oceans. There's a lot to contend with. In places like where humpback whales live, where there's overlap with vessel traffic, those whales have to deal with those human influences as well as finding food. I'm somewhat concerned about the future of humpback whales in Southeast Alaska because we lost those 30% of our population recently in a marine heat wave, and we don't really have any reason to believe that that was the last marine heat wave. So it's a pretty big concern. So I think that in terms of research needed, I think that we need to understand the factors that are occurring in both like acoustic impacts as well as in preventing and disentangling whales that get entangled in fishing gear. I think that we really need to understand the biology as well as we can. And in the case of when vessel collisions occur, we need to understand what the factors were that made that happen. And oftentimes it's very difficult to determine. Basically, collisions go unreported, so we don't really know what the circumstances were. And having better information always helps. And as I said, I feel like with the large vessel industry, with the cruise ship industry, we're doing a good job of kind of looking at what the actual problems are and isolating those. The more information we have about other parts of the of that issue of collisions between vessels and whales, for the smaller vessels, we really could use a lot more information on what the circumstances are of collisions.
So, tell me about the app again. What is that app called? The Whale Alert Alaska app, where you can keep track
Yeah,
of whales
yeah.
coming in and out.
Yeah, there's a Whale Alert Alaska mobile app that's on the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store, and anyone can download it. And if they're on a trip in Alaska or anywhere actually in the U.S., report the whales that they see, and that information goes to the people who need it to be able to avoid whales. And yeah, it's a really super tool.
So, those are all the questions I have. Any final thoughts?
Protecting whales is a really complex and important issue because whales are so valuable both culturally and economically. And there's a lot of good work going on in a lot of places. And I am more prepared to talk about the large vessel side of that because that's something where we're actively working with it. But it's important to know that vessels of all sizes have collisions and interactions with whales, and so it's not like one sector of the maritime industry is more problematic than another. It's really one of these complex problems where we need to look at all sides of it. And also that, I've been able to describe a lot of work here, that all of it is collaborative. It's not just, one person doing it. And I firmly believe that the more collaboration you can do, especially talking with different types of people, not just scientists talking to scientists, but talking to the public, talking to other mariners, those are the ways forward in terms of solving these conservation issues.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for sharing your insight on whale vessel collisions. I'm so happy to learn that many more whales don't get hit than do. So that's encouraging. And it's interesting to hear about all these protections in place. So we'll continue to follow this issue, and please feel free to reach out with any new developments as they come along.
Okay, thank you. I really enjoyed talking with you. Thanks so much for your time.
That's our show for this week. We hope you found it informative. With August halfway over, the summer is winding down, as is our 20th anniversary celebration of the National Parks Traveler. If you found Lynn's interview with Chris regarding the safety of marine life at Glacier Bay National Park and our diverse range of news articles from across the National Park System on the Traveler website, we hope you'll contribute towards our $20,000 for 20 years campaign. The money we raise from listeners and readers goes right back into content generation to ensure that you are on top of how your national parks are being managed and are treated to interesting stories that expand your knowledge of the parks and offer tips for how to get the most out of your adventures in the park system. You can find a donate button at the top of our homepage at nationalparkstraveler.org. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Repenschek. See you in the parks.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.